Hello and welcome to the LLG Grapevine podcast. You're listening to Helen McGrath, Executive Director for Policy and Governance, and I'm joined today by Deborah Evans, LLG's very own CEO.
Well, thank you, Helen, and it's a pleasure to be here, I have to say. And what a week it's been. There's been so much in the news concerning local government over the last 7 days. It's difficult to know where to start. So what have you got for us today then, Helen?
Well, last week, the AI conference sparked a lot of attention, and in particular, the discussion between the PM and Elon Musk. Quite how AI is intended to sit alongside antiquated local government legislation was not a topic for discussion, but one that I am particularly interested in. Meanwhile, reported in the BBC, the Home Secretary is proposing new laws to restrict the use of tents by homeless people where they have refused help, arguing that many see them as, quote, a lifestyle choice. But for now, let's examine some of the other news items included in the LLG bulletin and elsewhere. Deborah.
Well, I was particularly interested last week in the discussions around the COVID inquiry, particularly on the basis that it's moved more into the realms of culture and leadership and governance, rather than the specifics of who said what, who decided what, etc. And culture and leadership are issues we know are absolutely fundamental to good governance, which is why we're looking at them at the governance conference. But it was coming out really that as part of the COVID inquiry, the culture just was not right for making these big, important decisions. It talks about inadequacies, incompetencies, and all of that sort of thing, but also an institutional failure really in the system of government. And that's particularly galling when actually the nation was faced with a life and death situation. So there's talk about the leaders being poor, the culture being sexist, a bullying culture, and all of those sort of things that many will have heard also discussed, but perhaps on a smaller scale within local government. And culture is always one of those really nebulous things that's hard to define. So what does a good culture look like? What does a bad culture look like? And when do you know that your culture isn't right? But just because it's a difficult thing to measure and to report on doesn't mean that the focus should be on it. A good culture will give the right decisions to the right people, ensure that they're backed with the right evidence, and you need to have a speak up culture where people can then basically raise their voice if they have concerns. And as we see failures in local government, it does appear as a result of the COVID inquiry that potentially we're seeing a similar governance failure to some extent in central government, with culture and leadership often playing a part in both. So something for you to think about there. And obviously when we get to the end of the COVID inquiry, we'll be doing a full review of that within LLG to see how there is that copy across to local government. Now, Helen mentioned earlier about Elon Musk and AI, and as Elon Musk predicts the end of work as part of life in the future and tells people to start working out how else to find value in their life, you have to question whether it wouldn't be sensible to actually revisit the shape of the working week and perhaps make the time that's spent at work a smaller element of your life. Helen.
Well, that's a topical question, Deborah, because working a 4-day week is causing controversy in the local government world, because the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities have issued South Cambridgeshire District Council with a best value notice after expressing concerns about the local authority's trial of a 4-day working week. It's been reported in the local government lawyer that DLUC has acknowledged that the notice was being issued outside the statutory powers held by the Secretary of State under the Local Government Act to inspect or intervene in local authorities where there is evidence of best value failure, and separately under Section 230 of the Local Government Act 1972 to request information from local authorities. However, the important part is the department has said that a failure to demonstrate continuous improvement may be judged to contribute to best value failure, and the Secretary of State will consider using these powers as appropriate. Now, last week, the government have published non-statutory guidance for local authorities in England who are considering adopting a 4-day working week, where staff have their working hours reduced by 20% but retain 100% of their pay. So that guidance, and as I said, it's non-statutory, states that the government does not support a 4-day working week in local authorities, as it does not believe that it delivers local taxpayers value for money. And the government does not expect councils to adopt this arrangement. And should councils disregard this advice and there is evidence of service decline or failure, DLUC or another government department may raise concerns directly with the authority, monitor performance more closely, and consider options to correct declining performance. Options to correct declining performance, what does that mean? Well, statutory intervention and inspection, non-statutory intervention. We are told that South Cambridgeshire District Council are currently considering their position, and we will be following this.
Absolutely we will, because it is something of real interest to us, and indeed it's something we focused on in our EDI committee, because actually offering more flexibility within the working week can be really useful for people and can make us a more inclusive working environment. But the question is really, does it work? So does doing a 5-day week in 4 from the point of view of outputs rather than hours work? Well, let's measure it, why don't we? Let's use data rather than perception to see actually whether it works. Which brings me on to the topic of digital strategy within local government. So where is your authority with respect to a data and digital strategy? Now, quite often this is an area where local authorities fall behind because of the massive amount of investment required basically to get your council up to speed, to get it where it needs to be. But actually, investment in data and investment in a strong corporate digital strategy so that all of your directorates can talk to each other is really key in ensuring that you can deliver best value, because this is all about your resources working efficiently and effectively, and for you as a council being able to map the delivery of your services in the best way possible. And obviously a good digital strategy will then lead to a really strong reporting policy where data is collected. It will be accurate data that can then be analysed and used. So this is all very important because on the horizon we have other organisations who want to look at local government data. So one of the first hurdles will be making sure that that data is not only there, but it's accurate. Now, many of you will already be doing statutory reporting in a number of areas, but is it going to be wider than this? So what could we be doing with data? Helen?
Well, we're firmly in the territory of the Office for Local Government here, and they've written to the chief executives of local authorities in England, providing an update on the overall next steps for OFLOG and seeking their views on the next set of draft metrics for their local authority data explorer, which incidentally LLG has contributed to already. Josh Goodman, who's the interim chief executive of OFLOG, has outlined the fact that they want to focus for now on 2 problems that sector colleagues have told them about. So the first is the fact that the rate of serious governance and financial failures in local authorities is low, but has increased. And that OFLOG has been told that chief executives share their desire to ensure that warning signs of potential serious failure are spotted and addressed as early as possible. The second are that many chief executives have told OFLOG that even though their own local authority is performing well, they worry they're missing something, missing opportunities to make it even better. And in particular, a number have said that their organisation spends less time than the chief executive would like learning from other local authorities, and that the fear is that this is not making the best possible use of data. So to tackle the first problem, OFLOG want to find new ways to spot and address early warning signs of potential failure. And they want to do that in a way that complements, not duplicates, the work of DLUC and the LGA and others. And OFLOG's thinking on how best to do this is still developing. To tackle the second problem of missed opportunities for organisational improvement, OFLOG are considering a range of options, and in the short term, and they say over the coming months, they plan to organise some targeted webinars involving small groups of local authorities with similar characteristics to share experiences and approaches to delivering particular services. Whilst in the longer term, as OFLOG gets more capacity, they hope to extend to offering new analytical insights and reports on good practice and expert support to help the utilisation of data to improve performance. And OFLOG states that it wants to work closely with other organisations offering such support, as I said, so that they complement, not duplicate each other. Also, in parallel, OFLOG have said they want to continue to build the Data Explorer with the ultimate objective for it to be a focused dashboard that gives an easy way to compare data on each local authority to data on similar authorities. And this, OFLOG states, should serve as a useful prompt to identify potential areas for improvement and which other authorities might be contacted to share experiences and approaches. And it should also help, they say, citizens and civil society to ask the right questions. It was pleasing to note that OFLOG did recognise that data alone is rarely enough to assess a local authority's performance and often needs context via further investigation, including talking to people who understand the local area. And OFLOG wants to do more to make that clear to all users of the Data Explorer, both citizens and the media, so that they do not overinterpret the data that's published. So this is the most information, I think, to date that we've had out of OFLOG and the intentions in the work streams that they intend to bring forward in the future. Deborah.
Thank you indeed. So we love a bit of learning. That's why data can be really useful, because it actually provides an accurate picture rather than perception. So that is key. I always think you make decisions on accurate data rather than perception. And we've talked about the difficulty of potentially using that data if it's not there. But this is all about learning and moving forward once we know what could be better, which leads nicely onto the topic, I think, of legal reform. Now, it's been quite a week, I have to say, with the Procurement Act and the Levelling Up legislation becoming law. But what do we look for with legal reform? Well, back to that whole theory of learning. We're looking for improvement, we're looking innovation, impact, modernisation. We're looking to address needs, fill gaps, embrace change, remove barriers that may be in the way of local government operating at the moment. We want to demonstrate the shift in societal values and be up to date. We want to listen to the audience and evidence research, and then take that research and actually deliver some policy reform as a result of it. That's what we think of when we're thinking about legal reform. These are hugely important things that are done, hugely important decisions that are made to improve our lives moving forward. If we don't do that, it's basically a missed opportunity. So just before we go into the detail of the Levelling Up Bill, let's have a think about what opportunity may have been missed. Now, we have been campaigning for probably over 3 years now for virtual meetings, or hybrid meetings, probably the better term, within local authorities, so that decisions can be made in a meeting where not everybody is physically present. This doesn't take away from the desire for people to meet physically, face to face, in their council meetings, but what it does mean is that if you're a councillor who's unable to attend, you could log in remotely and you could contribute to that meeting. At the moment you can watch, but this is about taking part in that meeting and being able to be part of that decision. It's about being able to move a meeting online if there's dreadful weather, or if there's other issues that would make that a real issue. And obviously the pandemic was a clear indicator of when that can happen. It's about making sure that the fact that you have to attend a meeting does not impact on your demographic, because if it's always attendance in person, that can cause issues for people with childcare, caring responsibilities, or who work all over the country. So it's about expanding the people who can potentially be councillors. It's about looking at those who may be ill or injured and potentially can't attend a meeting in person. So all of those reasons mean that you get better governance if you are able to allow some remote attendance at meetings. And a lot of data, a lot of evidence has been put forward on this. And yet we sit here and we note that the Act that has gone through does not have the relevant clause in that will enable local government to make this change. But enough about the missed opportunities. Helen, tell me what you know.
Well, the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act is in law and was finally available at the tail end of last week in its final written version, because of course it came into law without a final version being available, and we had to wait a few days for that, probably because of the sheer number of amendments that took place. Now, we do know quite a bit about what it hasn't done, and of course you've spoken here about remote provision, and I think I'll be talking about remote provision every time I get the opportunity until we get remote provision. But let's look at what the Act does do. Well, our President, Rachel McCoy, wrote an article for the Local Government Chronicle in which she covered the planning aspects of the Act, because they're quite weighty, and these include the digitalisation of planning, interesting, acceleration of the adoption of local plans, the ability for local planning authorities to refuse planning applications where a developer has a track record of delayed build, changes to planning obligations, and the introduction of a new infrastructure levy to replace the community infrastructure levy, the death of environmental impact assessments in favour of a new system of environmental outcome reports, strengthening of enforcement provisions, and powers to amend planning permissions, which are not substantially different in effect to a previous permission on the site. And then we have devolution, of course, whereby the statutory basis for new forms of devolution deal within county areas has been established. The Act also includes 12 levelling up missions, a permanent pavement licensing regime, an obligation on water companies to address nutrient pollution, extending the Blue Plaque scheme to the rest of England, and a registration scheme for short-term lets. There's quite a lot in there, Deborah. It's a long act, but some commentators feel like the government missed a trick for sweeping reform, especially in regard to the climate change agenda.
Well, that's a good point, actually, Helen, because the government was only highlighting back in June their concerns around the climate change agenda with respect to local authorities, particularly with respect to lack of skills and capacity. And they talked earlier in the year about a lack of clarity regarding the roles and responsibilities that local government should play in the delivery of net zero, because there are no specific strategic targets. I appreciate many local authorities have adopted targets, but there aren't any specific targeted ones for local government. Then we have fragmented funding and the prevalence of competitive bidding, for example, around retrofitting schemes, which can make it quite difficult for local authorities to plan for the long term. And the funding element of that, I would say, is key. These schemes are very expensive, so are they affordable? There's then also a lack of consistency in local authorities' reporting of plans and progress on net zero, which can then make it difficult to get an overall picture of what local authorities have achieved, potentially something maybe OFLOG might get involved in due course. And then all of this really just ties into, have we got the capacity, the skills and the funding in local government to tackle climate change and actually achieve those targets? So on that note, you can read more on the items discussed today and many more besides by going to bulletin number 38, which is available on the LLG website now. So until then, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me too.